Hello and welcome back to a mussel fishing film. I've been asked numerous times about how people can predict the sea conditions in the future, and in today's video it's a complete beginner's guide for those starting out sea fishing, boating, kayaking and want to learn about how they can predict the sea conditions the next day, the following day, or in 3 or 4 days time. So the reason why we want to be able to determine the sea conditions is to be able to know whether we can safely go to sea in our kayak, our sib, our boat, or whether the sea is going to be good for windsurfing or any other sporting activity. So in this video our main aim is to be looking at sea fishing and finding the best conditions where the sea is going to be flat calm. So by the end of this complete beginner's guide you're going to know exactly what to look for with the wind, the tides, the directions, everything you need to know in order to make a safe prediction or an accurate prediction as good as it's going to be with the information that the apps provide. Part 1 of this video is going to be looking at the apps that we can use to accurately predict what the sea is going to be doing in the coming days. The apps that I'm going to suggest you use are XC Weather, Windy, and then you also are going to want a Google Maps or an Apple Maps, and if you want to download Met Office as well, that's also something that can be added into your arsenal of apps. So I'm going to load up XC on the phone and I'm going to show you how roughly it works and what you can see from XC Weather. So here is my phone here. We're going to click on XC Weather. I'm going to click on History and I'm going to go to Eastbourne as that's my local part of the world. Now if we zoom in, on the left hand side you can see the time. You've then got wind direction, that is on the arrow there, so we can see today that is a south-westerly, and down here later on it becomes more westerly wind. We can see the wind speeds, then we can see what it's gusting up to, we can see the rough temperature, precipitation for the day, and it'll give us a rough little symbol as to what's happening as well. So you can see why I've done this video this week, because if we scroll down we can see it's all red and yellow and greens for the wind. Not really what we're looking for. What we're looking for is these blues, but in a prolonged period of time. So we can see Wednesday wouldn't be very good either, even though there's some blue in there. It's also got some yellow, not so good. Down here we've got reds. So yeah, not very good for going to sea particularly. Although down here we've got a northerly wind, a northwesterly wind, and in some certain parts of the world this will be okay, and in some parts of the world or UK it won't be, but we'll talk about that in depth later on. But that's the user interface for XC Weather, so that gives a really good indication of whether we can go to sea or not. What's really important to know with XC Weather is it usually under predicts what the wind is actually going to be, so take it with a little bit of caution. Sometimes it can be a little bit more. I have found XC Weather to under predict the weather that little bit. So on XC Weather we saw those colour codes. Now they go down to dark blue. Now dark blue's great. That means there's barely any wind, 0 to 4 or 5 miles an hour. And then it goes slight lighter in shade on the blues. And that's still pretty much going to be okay to go sea fishing if it's blue on wind and it's blue on gusts. But as it goes up it then goes to greens and yellows and reds. Generally reds you're never going to go to sea. But sometimes on an amber, in certain parts of the world, you're still going to be able to go sea fishing, but we're going to explain that in part 3. So this is just looking at the interfaces. So XC Weather will give you the wind and the gusts in a colour coordinated way. If you see dark blue, that's great pretty much for anywhere. If it's light blue to medium blue, again, pretty much okay. It's when you start to hit the greens and the yellows, you need to read the weather a little bit more. So that's XC Weather. Let's have a look at the Windy app quickly. So let's open Windy up here, and when we open that up it's going to give us a map. So you can see the UK and Ireland there, and the good thing is it gives weather fronts in colours. So up here green, yellow weather front, and down here is a dark blue weather front. And now that's dark blue is a good weather front, but that isn't today by the way, that is Wednesday. So let's scroll to today. Oh dear, as you can see today we've got really big winds, big rain. And you can see there, the weather front there is not particularly nice. Now on Windy you get arrows swishing along the screen. That's going to tell you where the wind's coming from. So down here is obviously the south, and it's firing up from the sort of west. So it's a southwesterly wind. It's going in a direction coming from the west and the south. So it's sort of a southwesterly direction, and it's swooping across. So that's giving us exceptionally rough weather. Now if we go lower on the interface, so we go away from the map, and if we click display as, put it into waves, and this is quite handy this, so I'm going to bring you into here. It will give you a few options. It's going to give you the mile an hour of the wind, so there it's 26 mile an hour, gusting to 33. But the interesting part is it gives you waves, so it's 1.8 metre waves at the moment, with a 0.7 metre swell. Now that isn't very nice at all, I can tell you. Swell period is every 7 seconds. That's considered a short swell. Anything 15 seconds or under, or say 12 to 15 seconds or under, that's considered a short swell. And basically the shorter the swell, so 2 seconds there, 3.1 seconds, that's every 2 seconds you're getting that horrible 0.7 metre swell. So it's going to be very rough, very choppy, short chop. And generally that's what we get in the area that we've selected, which is the English Channel up here around Brighton, Hastings way. If we go down west, generally they get a longer swell period, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So it's quite good because it gives the wave height, and it gives the wind, and it gives us the wind direction, and there's a nice little map there that we can see weather fronts coming in and out. So up here today we can see Scotland's having quite a nice day, quite a calm day, and down south, down here, is all red and horrible. So that's the Windy app. It allows you to go into a little bit more detail about the sea state. We're going to talk about all this in part 3, and we're going to bring it all together, but I'm just showing you the interfaces at the moment and roughly how to use them. Met Office I would download. Sometimes I use that for whether I'm going to be able to see fog, rain, snow, sun. It's quite good for that. I don't generally look at Met Office's wind prediction because they always over-predict. They're the opposite to XC. They over-predict, and if we look at the Met Office's wind, we probably would never get to see because it always shows more than what it generally is. Sometimes it doesn't. If Met Office is showing low winds, usually it's going to be low winds and you're going to be good to go. But if it's showing medium winds and XC's showing great winds, then I would sort of mix the two together and go, well, it's probably going to be a bit more than XC, but a bit more under Met Office and sort of meet in the middle. So we can't always judge the forecasts to what they're going to be, but that's the only information we can go on. So I would look at XC, Windy and Met Office and work out an average. So those are the apps that you're going to require. Let's get into the video about where we look at how to put it all together, tides as well, tide directions, geographical locations. We're going to tile that in, and I'm going to show you on the whiteboard how to predict the sea states. Right, welcome to the classroom. This is a whiteboard, this is a pen, and I'm going to do my very best to explain how we can predict sea conditions at sea. There's obviously a few things that we have to look at. The first thing is wind speed. That's number one. Alright, wind speed is the first thing that we need to look at when deciding whether we go to sea. Now, generally speaking, if you've got a wind speed of under 10 mile an hour, wind speed and the gusts are also under 10 mile an hour, generally the sea is going to be flat regardless of where you are in the UK. So under 10 mile an hour, you pretty much can guarantee a flat calm sea if the wind is below 10 mile an hour. There's a few things that we have to look at further, but that's going to be in part 3 of this video. But part 2 is just explaining some of the things that we have to look at. So that's the first thing. Number 2, wind direction. Right, so the second thing that we're looking at is wind direction. Now, winds can be coming from the north, northeasterly, they can be coming from the east, they can be southeasterly, south, they could be going southwesterly, west, or northwesterly. Alright, so winds can be going in either of those directions. Now the wind direction is interesting. Parts of the UK are going to prefer a northerly wind. Some parts of the UK are going to prefer a southerly wind. We're going to talk about that later on in the video. But at the moment you need to be looking at wind direction and whether it's northerly, easterly, westerly, southerly, southeasterly, westerly. You get the idea. Number 3. The third thing we need to look at, previous day's weather. Now, previous day's weather matters. If it's been absolutely howling all day on the Monday and Tuesday's meant to be nice, it might not be as nice as you think, because Monday has built so much energy up in that sea, it takes time for that sea to calm down. Again, we're going to talk about all this later when we bring it all together, but for now you've got to consider the previous day's weather. So number 4 is very important, is tides. So tides are so important. It depending on the tide direction we've got to take into account, and also tide strength. All important because it works with the sea. And those are the main 4 things that we need to be looking at when deciding to go to sea. Wind speed, wind direction, previous day's weather, and number 4, the tides, the tide direction, and tide strengths. Now, this is a beginner's guide, so we're going to include some beginner's bits. Tide strength. You need to look at tide heights. Tide strength can change according to the moon phase and a couple of other things. So a bigger tide, so they're done in metres, a big tide in Eastbourne is about 8 metres, 7.8 metres to about 8 metres. A small tide, about 4.8, 5 metre tide is a small tide, it's a neap tide in Eastbourne. So if you've got a massive tide, so the tide strength is big, there's more energy in the sea, and there's more sea being moved, which obviously when you are working with the wind and the wind's working with it or against it, that can change the sea conditions and the sea state. So we will talk about all this in part 3. Stick with us, it will all make sense soon. I'm just going through the bits that you're going to have to consider and take in. Big one with the tides as well is tide direction. I'm going to use a south coast example. Down in Eastbourne, if the tide is running towards the west, so it's coming from the east, so it's going from Hastings all the way down towards Cornwall, that is an ebb. So it's ebbing. Alright? And an ebbing tide down at Eastbourne is going from the east, going to west. So an easterly wind and an ebbing tide is going together. That is what we call wind with tide. Now again, using Eastbourne as an example on the south coast, if we have a flooding tide, so flooding tide is coming from the west and it's going towards the east. Now, a westerly wind means it's coming from the west. So if we have a westerly wind, the wind is going this way. Westerly wind means that wind with tide is going to be on the flood, because the flooding tide is going from west to east, it's going in that direction. Westerly wind is also going in that direction, so it's wind with tide. That's what you call wind with tide. When you hear people say wind against tide, it means it's coming the opposite way. So if the tide is going to the east, alright, so it's flooding, and then you've got an easterly wind, I've got to make sure I get this right now. If you've got an easterly wind and a flooding tide in Eastbourne, it's going to be wind against tide, yeah, because you've got easterly winds coming towards the west, and your tide is coming from west to east, so they're crossing like that, and that can create a choppy sea, especially if our tide strength is big and we have big spring tides, more energy in the water, and we also have high winds or medium winds as well. It will create a bigger sea. So it might all sound all very complicated, but that is part 2 of this video. Things that we've got to look at: wind speed, wind direction, previous day's weather, and tides, tide direction, and tide strength. Now you're probably learning a few little bits already, but what I'm going to do now is we're going to put everything together. We're going to look at our apps. We're going to look at some real-time scenarios now. We're going to look at today's weather and Wednesday's weather, because they're 2 totally separate things. We're going to look at 2 separate places, locations. So we're going to do a northerly facing coastline and a southerly facing coastline. I'm going to explain all these in a little bit more detail, and that hopefully should help you out with how you can tell your sea states going forward. So now we've looked at wind speed, wind direction, the previous day's weather and future weather, and the tides. You know a little bit about those now. Let's have a little look about putting it all together to bring us our prediction on what the sea conditions are going to be like. So I'm going to attempt to draw England. I think that's pretty good. So this is the UK. We've got Minehead, let's say, down here. And down there's Westward-O, Ilfracombe, Bude, all down here. Alright, so this is North Devon and North Cornwall. Down here we've got Looe, South Cornwall, we've got Falmouth, Plymouth, all of those sort of places. So we've got South Cornwall, and then down here we've got me at Eastbourne on the southeast coast. And then up here we've probably got, I don't know, something like Hull, maybe, where the Humber is, York. You're just going to have to bear with me. Down here we've got Cardiff, Barry, something like that. Going to have to just pretend that this is real, alright? So now we've got our map. We're going to have a look at some wind speeds, some tidal conditions, and we're going to work out through 1, 2, 3 and 4 whether the sea is going to be good or not. So I'm going to give you some examples. So I'm going to bring you a bit closer, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at down at Eastbourne, which is the southeast coast. Okay, welcome to Eastbourne. Now I've written speed, direction, previous day's weather and tide on there, just so we can keep an eye on what we're talking about. Here is going to be an example. So we have got a northerly wind today at Eastbourne. So the wind is coming down from the north in that direction. Alright, and we've got our sea here like that. Alright. Now, a northerly wind, I'm going to put an N there for northerly. A northerly wind down at Eastbourne is quite good if you're wanting to fish inshore. Because what we can do is we can look at the wind speed and we actually think, do you know what? It's 25 mile an hour gusts. So it's going between, say, 15 and 25 miles per hour. Now, on XC weather, that is going to come up as yellow and it's going to come up as amber. So you might first look at that and think, that's not going to be very pleasant. But we've then got to look at, so we've looked at the speed, probably not going to be very pleasant. Let's look at wind direction. Oh, it's a northerly, so actually it might be okay. And the reason is because a northerly wind on the south coast pushes the sea away and it pushes it out. So it flattens it off and it can be like glass on 25 miles per hour inshore. So if you're wanting to fish 2 miles out, maybe a mile out, or just half a mile out for place, just to get out, you're not bothered about what you're going to catch, you just want to get out a little bit. A 25 mile an hour wind down at Eastbourne on a northerly is going to be fine. You're going to be absolutely fine. It's going to be nice and calm. The direction is fine because it's a northerly. Previous day's weather, if we've had northerlies, easterlies or westerlies, and they're not too massive, you know, sort of sub 30 mile an hour, that 25 mile an hour wind on a northerly will flatten that sea off quite quickly. So previous day's weather on a big strong northerly, or not strong northerly, but a decent northerly, 25 mile an hour, as long as the weather's not been horrific and there's not loads of energy in the sea, so it's not been like 50, 60 mile an hour winds all day, then actually that's going to be not a bad forecast to go out on. The tide, well, to be honest with you, on a northerly, because the tides run east to west, the tides run in this, well, either east or west direction, they go that way or that way. A northerly doesn't really matter. The only thing I would say on a northerly wind is anchoring. It can swing a little bit on anchor because obviously the boat is being pushed that way and the tide's coming across it. So it can sometimes swing. If that northerly is quite strong, it can sort of swing the boat in that sort of direction. But if you're drifting, if it's a small tide as well, then you're not going to have too many issues. I wouldn't be considering, if I was going out on a 25 mile an hour forecast, I'm going to be really inshore for plaice, for dabs, for whiting, maybe some thornback rays. I'm not really going to be thinking too much about that tide size on a northerly. But our next example, which I'm going to show you, is definitely going to be where I'm going to be looking at tide. Right, so now we have got scenario number 2. We've got 12 mile an hour gusting speeds. The main wind can be anything. I generally will only look at gusts, not because if you look at gusts, that's pretty much what its maximum going to be. So if you assume that that's what it's blowing all day, that will give you more leeway. So we're going to say 12 mile an hour gusting all day. The direction of the wind is going to be a westerly wind. Previous day's weather it's pretty calm. It was all right. You know, it wasn't anything crazy. It was just a choppy-ish day at sea, but it weren't too bad. So we can go, okay, previous day's weather we can discount because it just wasn't anything to note. The tide today is 7.6 metres, so it's quite a big tide for Eastbourne. It's not a small tide. It's a pretty big tide. We have the tide times, as we've said. 12 p.m. is going to be the high tide. 6 p.m. is going to be the low tide. So this is our sea again, like that. So we're going to launch at 6 a.m. in the morning, just as an example. We launch our boat at 6 in the morning and the tide is flooding. So the tide is going that way. It's going towards the east. It's coming from the west to the east. We're going to use the red one for the wind. The wind is also, because it's a westerly wind, we've got westerly wind is also going towards the east. So westerly wind that way. Our tide is also going that way. It's going towards the west. So we've got wind with tide in the morning. So we launch our boat at 6 in the morning and up till 12 p.m. midday, that sea should be rather calm because the winds are below 12 mile an hour. It's only gusting to 12. It's not too bad. We've got westerly wind, so the wind is going towards Hastings, and not only the wind is going towards Hastings, the tide is also going towards Hastings as well. So the two arrows here, as you can see, are going towards the east. It's coming from the west, going towards the east. It's all running together until 12 p.m. because it's flooding. Now, from 12 p.m, this is where we have to now think, right, let's dig into it a little bit deeper now, because from 12 p.m, it's going to change. And from 12 p.m, the tide is now going to be ebbing. Right, so 12 p.m. down to 6 p.m. in the afternoon, we're going to have the tide going towards the west. It's going to be coming from east, going towards west. So it's going to be coming this direction. I'm going to scribble off that because that will get you confused. So from 12 p.m. onwards, the tide is going to be going towards the west. I'm going to rub off this. Just so it makes it a bit easier. Get our red one out, because we've already looked at what the tide's doing. The red is the wind, but the wind stays westerly, so it's still coming towards the west. Now, as we can see, the arrows there are hitting each other. They're hitting each other, so we've got tide in the black, red in the wind. Tide wants to go this way, ebbing. Wind wants to go this way. They're clashing. So it's going to be wind against tide at this time of day. So from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m, the tide is ebbing. It's going out. It's going this way, but the wind is still carrying on west. So that is when you think, biggish tide means there's still quite a lot of energy there. It could get a bit choppy and it could get a little bit uncomfortable. If we had a smaller tide, maybe a 5 metre tide, the wind over tide doesn't matter so much because there's not so much energy in the tide. It's quite a small tide. It's still going to be pretty calm under 12 mile an hour. But if it goes 12, if the forecast's slightly wrong, it's 15 mile an hour, wind over tide, it might get a little bit choppy. So that's when you might think, do you know what, I'll come in. I'll go out early and I'll fish till midday, but I do expect to come back a bit earlier because it's going to be wind against tide and it could be a little bit choppy. So that's one example there as to where the morning might be okay, but the afternoon might not be, because the tide changes direction, then it goes against the wind. But yeah, we could change that. We could say highs at 6 p.m. and then lows at 12 p.m. That would just mean that the afternoon's calmer and the morning isn't so calm. Hopefully that makes sense. Right, so a few weeks later, and we want to go to sea again. We're getting a bit twitchy. We have a little look at the weather forecast again. We're basing this on Eastbourne, and today the speed is 12 miles per hour, gusting up to, but the direction's changed. The direction today is a southerly wind. Previous day's weather was also a southerly wind, but it was quite a strong southerly wind, so that did kick up the sea a little bit. And the tide, again, is still the same, let's say, 7.6 metres, so it's still quite a big tide. A southerly wind on the south coast isn't particularly nice. So we've got the wind coming up from the south here. We've got a big, strong southerly wind. Now that southerly wind is pushing the sea towards the shore. So it's creating lots of chop on the shore, some big waves. It's just creating lots of stir up because we've got lots of energy being forced this way. Alright, now 12 mile an hour southerly wind isn't very nice. It's not really fishing. It's not what I would want to be going out in, because if that goes to 15 mile an hour in the day, which it can regularly change, 15 mile an hour southerly wind down on the south coast is not nice to be in, I can promise you. So looking at that, I might think 12 mile an hour all day, it's gusting to 15, there's a southerly wind there. Maybe I will go out, but I will be on the edge of caution. If I was local, I might go down and check the conditions out and go, yeah, it's okay to launch, we'll launch the boat. But if I had a 2-hour drive and I was looking at that forecast, I might give it a bit of a miss. Just because of that wind condition, it's southerly, so it's pushing it. So southerly's bad in Eastbourne. Northerly, quite good if you want to just get out. You might not be able to get out too far on a strong northerly, but if it's a light northerly, then fantastic. You'll be able to get out all day long if it's a light northerly under 10 mile an hour. Westerly wind. Again, westerly's pretty good down at Eastbourne. Beachy Head protects us a little bit from a westerly wind. So as long as it's going with the tide and it's below about 12, below even 15 mile an hour, if it's a strong westerly, 15 mile an hour only gusting, a wind with tide situation, yeah, we could probably get out, but I probably wouldn't go wind against tide on a 15 mile an hour westerly and a big tide. Probably wouldn't. But an easterly for down at Eastbourne is disgusting. An easterly wind we're very, very exposed to. It's not particularly nice. The wind's firing, there's no protection whatsoever, and a sort of 12 mile an hour gusting easterly wind. If that gets to 15 mile an hour, it can, again, get a little bit choppy. So it all depends on where you're at. Now, we've looked at a south-facing coastline. I'm just going to pop up to Minehead now, which is a northerly-facing coastline, to show you what the difference is there. Right, so we're at Minehead now. I'm going to use the same as previous. So we're at Minehead now. I'm going to use the same example we've just used. 12 mile an hour, strong southerly. Previous days also strong southerly, and the tide is 7.6. But we're on a northerly facing coastline. So you've got the Bristol Channel all up here. Like so. Going out towards the Irish Sea and the Atlantic. Now, a southerly wind is going to be coming from up here, going that way. And what's that arrow doing? As it's a southerly wind, it's pushing that sea away and up towards Wales, Barry, Cardiff. So, in Minehead, you don't have to go far for fishing. You're normally fishing sub half a mile out. So a southerly wind, probably get out in 30 mile an hour. I would say I've been out in 25 and it was flat as a dodo. 30 mile an hour wind, proper southerly wind down at Minehead will be pretty calm. But again, you need to use your experience on this. Not everyone's going to want to do that. But for me, I know what I can get away with. I know how much I can deal with. So on Minehead, a 30 mile an hour wind, gusting max, is not necessarily too bad, providing it's a strong southerly wind. Now, the next day, let's change the scenario. The next day, we have got a northerly wind. Now, as we said earlier, a northerly wind for south coast, south-facing coastline, is good. A northerly wind for a north-facing coastline isn't going to be very good. So we've got a northerly-facing wind, we've got a north wind That looks like a W. We've got a north wind coming down towards Minehead, like that. And what that's doing is it's pushing the sea towards Minehead. I would not want to be going out anything more than probably about 10 mile an hour. To be honest, 10 mile an hour is probably going to be about the max that I'd want to be going out at Minehead on a northerly wind, to be honest. It's massive tides in Minehead, very, very strong tidal conditions. So that's something we'd really want to think about. So that's how a northerly southerly is affected on a southerly coastline. A northerly coastline, obviously, up here, if we go towards Hull, which is up here, again, an easterly wind down at Hull. It's going towards the land, isn't it? So it's going to be rough. But guess what? A westerly wind pushing the sea away is going to help it to be calm. Alright, so that's what you can look at. The wind directions and geographical locations, that's really important. So hopefully, after those explanations, you can work out a little bit as to whether the wind's going to be working with you, against you, whether the tide is also going to be working with you or against you. One thing I do want to have another look at is a couple of things in regards to the tides. Now, on navigational charts, on Navionics, on some of the Garmin charts, you can get tidal diamonds, and they will help you look at tidal direction, and it also help you look at tidal strengths as well. The stronger the tide strength just means there's more energy in the sea. It means that you can get away with slightly less wind than you could on maybe a neap tide, which is a small tide. Neap equals small tide. So that's something really worth having a look at on your navigational charts. So I hope you've taken some of that in. It probably is a little bit overwhelming at the moment because there's so much to take in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe the whiteboard, and then we're going to go through just some key terms and some key points that I will make to help you decide what the sea is going to be like. So hopefully you will have learnt something already. We've looked at the wind speeds, and obviously, look, each individual area of the UK is going to be different. I can't cover the whole of the different coastlines because it will just take hours and hours. But what I can do is just try and give you a rough insight so you can understand. Because sometimes down on the west coast they've got loads of little coves, they've got bits of which stick out like this so you can tuck in, and you know, you can probably get fishing more down in Cornwall because you can get out of the wind. Well, down where I am, you can't get out of the wind. You can either get out or you can't. So there's lots of different factors, but I can't add in all those factors in this video because it would just take too long. This is really just a rough beginner's guide as to what you can look out for to try and determine whether the sea is going to be calm or not. So again, I'm going to wipe the whiteboard and we'll go through it all again, but just very quickly, and just add in some key bits as well. Now, one thing I do want to touch on before we move on, it's really important to understand what vessel you're in and the experience you have. So if you're in a kayak, for example, now kayaks is man-powered. You are the person powering that. A very strong northerly wind pushing you away from the shore could actually be quite dangerous in a kayak if you haven't got the strength to push against that wind. So if you're out in a 30 mile an hour wind in a kayak, the sea might look very flat, but it will push you away from the shore. So just bear that in mind. Can you power back against a 30 mile an hour northerly wind? In my Hobie, I know I can. The issue is, if my little pedals break and I've got to row it in, it's going to be difficult. I could do it, I think, but it would be difficult. So I will bear that in mind when I choose whether I'm taking my kayak out in a 30 mile an hour northerly wind. Also, if the sea does change, am I able to get in safely? With a kayak or a tiny little boat, if it goes wind against tide and it's really rough, it might be very unpleasant and it might be unsafe. So that might be worth thinking about. If I'm in a massive catamaran and the sea state gets really rubbish and the forecast changes for the worse while I'm out there, does it really matter? Not really. I'm just going to head in slowly. It's going to be an uncomfortable ride, but I'm in a big boat and I'm safe. So just make sure that what vessel you're in, you're considering the conditions more if you're in a less capable vessel. You have got to bear in mind conditions can change at sea and they can change quickly. So we've covered what we can cover, really, but I'm just going to give you some of my tips an advice which may appeal to you or it may not. When I am looking at XC weather, if it's dark blue, if on XC weather the weather is dark blue, symbols for wind speed and for gusts, if it's dark blue, I'm going to be going to sea. It's as simple as that. If, on the other hand, there's a bit of lighter blue in there and it's teetering on green, I'll investigate it further. Tides, if they're massive tides, I will look at the wind with tide and the wind against tide situation, more so if it's a bit touch and go. So if it's 12 to 15 mile an hour, I will really be looking at whether we're going with the tide, against the tide, what time I want to launch, and what the tide and wind are going to be doing at the same time I launch. So that's something I'll be doing. But yeah, it all depends on what fishing you want to do as well, you know. Wrecking, I like massive tides when I'm wrecking, but then I might want to get off 10 miles out to sea. It's not offshore, but 10 miles is still a long way in my 3-metre boat. So I want dark blue, I want the previous day's weather to have been calm, and I also want the next day's weather to be calm. So this is something you've also got to consider when you're planning your trip. Let's say Monday the weather's been lovely, and it's Sunday today, and Sunday's okay. So Sunday you're like, yeah, it's okay, it's not creating too many problems with the sea. Monday looks like a nice day to be out, but Tuesday, 70 mile an hour on Tuesday, there's a massive weather front coming in. What's worth bearing in mind is it might be better to get out in the morning and finish the early afternoon on the Monday, because sometimes that weather front can push forward, and while you're out there you don't want a massive weather front coming and hitting you. But if the next day is nice as well, then I'll probably go, oh, it's okay, we've got a nice big window here, I'm going to go bang in the middle of it, and I'm going to do my 10 mile turbot in or wrecking trip on that big tide. Because if it does change, which it shouldn't, at least I know it's changing just a little bit bad, it's not going to get really bad. So that's something that's worth considering depending on what trip you're planning. If I'm travelling out a long way, I'm going to be looking at the next day's weather as well, because if that horrible weather comes in early, it's going to change the sea really quickly. So that's definitely something to think about. On the windy app, the swell level, that's something I want to touch on actually, is swell. Now I just want to make it clear, in the following few minutes, when I talk about swell, I'm also talking about wave height as well. So swell and waves come hand in hand, they are different, and I'll try and explain it a bit now. Now something I want to explain with this overlay is what waves and what swell are. Swell is something that is created normally from a storm over a long period of time, and waves are the shorter, more localized chop which is created by wind and tides. Now I won't go into that in too much detail, I don't need to. What is important is you look at the heights. So here we can see at Bradwell on Sea there is a slight offshore wind, so that's helping push that inshore sea a little bit flatter. We can see the waves are 0.6 metres, the swell is 0. Now the reason the swell is 0 is because it is an offshore wind. You cannot get swell from an offshore wind. I don't need to go into that in this video, but what I will say is when it's an offshore wind, or any sort of wind, you need to look at waves and the swell, because waves are what are created more locally with the local wind and the tides. Swell is the sea conditions which have been generated from miles away over a long period of time, and then it arrives on the coast in, say, a day or 2 days later and doesn't lose very much energy. When it comes to swell, if the previous day's weather has been horrible, but the next day is really nice and you're looking to get out on that day, but you're a bit concerned about the day previously, then concentrate on swell. Have a little look at what the swell is going to be like. If it's going to be above 0.5 metres, that's when, for me in a 3-metre boat, I'm going to start to consider it. If it's 0.6, 0.7, I'll then have a look at the intervals of how long that swell is in between. If it's 20-30 seconds, then I'm going to go out. It's no problem. Every 20 seconds, a wave at 0.6, 0.7 metres, no problem, you know. But if it's a 0.5 metre swell, even, at 0.1 seconds, it's going to be like that. It's not very nice. So that is definitely something to consider, is swell. And swell I do take a good look at if the previous day's weather hasn't been very nice. But what you will find is if it's been dark blue on XC for a few days and you've got a nice big weather window, it will normally be 0.1 to 0.2, and that's lovely. That's like glass. Down the West Country though, for example, touching on swell, the West Country, you can get, wait for this, you can get a 5 metre swell, which is massive, but on a westerly wind generally down there, a 5 metre swell might be every 20 seconds. Now that, even in my 3 metre boat, I'll go out in that, no problem whatsoever. That will be comfortable. Yes, the swell's massive, but because the interval is every 20 seconds, it means it's a big rolling swell like that. Now, something to add, if the swell is 5 metres and it's every 20 seconds, I'll also be looking on Windy what the waves are doing. I want those waves to be under 0.2 metres, because those waves, I don't want to be big on top of that 5 metre swell, because that'll be a horrible sea. What I mean is if it's 5 metre swell every 20 seconds with 0 metre waves, that will be fine. Their swell can be 20 to 30 seconds apart. And I have been out in 25 to 30 foot waves, but the swell's 25 seconds apart. I've got the experience for that. I'm happy to be out in that. Not everyone would be, but just for me, that's fine. 25 to 30 seconds, I can deal with that, no problem whatsoever. Obviously, use your eyes as well. That's another bit of advice I've got. If you get down to the sea and you look at it and go, don't go out. Don't go out. You know, especially if you're inexperienced. If you look at it and you're umming and erring, you shouldn't be out. If you look at it and go, oh, it looks quite calm, then go. You know, then go. But yeah, use your eyes when you're down there as well. You can look at forecasts as much as you like, but they do change. There's been many a time where I've packed my boat up and I've gone down to the coast, ready to launch, and I look at the sea and I turn back. Even with the experience that I've got, I still turn back because I look at it and go, it's just not worth it. You know, if that's wind with tide, what's wind against tide going to be? You know, you have to weigh up your options, guys. But on XC, if it's dark blue or light blue, I pretty much can get out. If it's a bit of yellow or green in there, as I said, I look into it a little bit more. If we're getting towards amber, unless it's a heavy northerly and I just want to go and flick a rod out locally inshore, then I won't be going out at all. But if it's a strong northerly, 25 mile an hour, and I just want to go whiting, bashing, or bit of place, bit of flounder, you know, 700-800 yards off the coast, then I will go. So we've pretty much covered everything, really. We've covered wind speed, we've covered wind directions, we've tidal strengths and tides, wind against tide, wind with tide. So I think, hopefully, you will have learnt quite a lot in this video. If you have any questions, please do ask. It's likely I might have missed a few things out. I don't think I have, but I might have done. If you've got a question, please do ask. Just remember, every single bit of coastline is different. What you can get away with is different. Sometimes you can get away with more, sometimes you can get away with less. You just need to work that out. But that's the basics. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel if you don't already. And please do leave a comment below as to what you think. Cheers, take care.